So as mentioned, we will be doing the information from this point in between the unboxing and the first espressos. But what do we need to do or have prepared in order for us to make our first espresso? Of course, we will need certain things like coffee. But coffee is quite subjective and is obviously, dependent on your taste. But what I would say is, please buy fresh coffee. What you don't want to expect out of the box is for the DE1 to do its magic on some old or sort of stale beans. You won't get a very pleasant result out of it. So if you know that your machine is coming, just plan to have at least half a kilo of beans. I say half a kilo. It sounds quite a lot, but in essence, when you're really sort of experimenting and getting a feel of the DE1, half a kilo wouldn't actually be that much. Even myself, when I know myself around the DE1 and also the grinder that I use, which is at home is the niche one, I tend to find 100 grams is probably the least amount I would want to be able to really tune in a blend, that bean. But if I wanted to continually drink that for at least a week, I would expect to have at least 250 grams. So half a kilo, you would expect that to last at least a week or 2 weeks, depending on how much you're really sort of experimenting or honing in your skills. So let's take the presumption that you've made espresso before and you know your way around an espresso machine. I do often say to people that the DE1 platform will challenge you to a certain extent because your knowledge on espresso will be challenged. And why do I say that is the new data points you have, more often than not, you will be wondering what they mean and wondering how to interpret them. So we often say to people that stick to one profile and make sure you have enough beans to use that profile without changing the beans too much. This is for the reason that you don't want too many variables while you're trying to learn the habits and the nuances of the DE1 platform. If you have the same beans and you're using the same profile for at least a week, it's safe to say that you will be fairly confident in recognizing when things are, let's say, under-extracted or over-extracted. Now, if you're wondering what over and under extracted is when the shot went too fast and you've not drawn out enough flavor in your shot, and it can be unpleasant or sour. Okay, over extracted would be the opposite. The shot took too long and you're drawing out rather unpleasant flavors that you wouldn't want in your espresso. Okay, so identification through data points is the main thing a lot of people will learn and start their journey from. But before we get there, as I mentioned, we really have to delve into the app, which we will do in a moment. I will share a screen of the DE1 app and go through some of the basic features. So going back to the videos, after you watch the unboxing videos, this is where the information will be useful. Okay, so you can see on the screen here that this is one of the first pages most people will read, and immediately we can kind of see that we include the community a lot. So we ask for feedback or they make suggestions and then we improve from there. And this is one of the very key things that is, let's say, you're not just buying a machine at DE1, you're also will have access to this community. And this is where you essentially learn, share, and ask or be part of someone's journey while you are learning your skills or helping someone else to learn. So all this can be daunting, but the community does help. You know, if you have a problem, you can post back on the forum. Most people will be willing to help you and help you in good kindness. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can reach out to us directly through a private message, which are called pings, or you can email us through our customer service lines. Okay. Now, I just want to point out to this bit here, we do make recommendations as well. And when we do make recommendations for profiles or someone that is, let's say, very new to coffee, and maybe they haven't got a lot of experience, we would generally tend to say, use gentle and sweet. Okay, so gentle and sweet is a profile or preset recipe that we've created on the DE1 app that is essentially for newbies coming to the DE1 or newbies who are new to espresso. Okay, and it was designed essentially to be gentle on the puck and to draw out a lot of sweetness. And the way it does that is it does a very low bar pressure, and it has a declining decline phase on it as well, which essentially is very gentle on the puck. And it's very good profile in that it gives you very positive results without much fine tuning. So as well as things that we do let you know, recommendations are given. But we also know that everyone is not on the same level. So we also provide a recommendation of the default profile, which I would generally say, if you have made coffee before, try use default. If you've never made coffee before, use gentle and sweet. I found that gentle and sweet doesn't tick the boxes that a few people who have made coffee before are essentially looking for in coffee. So whenever I've recommended gentle and sweet to those type of users, they've generally been a little bit, the hype hasn't been given to them. Even though they've got a decent shot that is acceptable and very drinkable, it doesn't have the complexities that, let's say, the default profile will give. And I would say that the default profile does give a very, very good shot. And this is the profile that we play around with in the learning from the levers, in which I actually taste shots while John is making shots for me. So this is a very good profile to start off from if you've had previous experience with coffee. So the main difference between the gentle and sweet and default is the default will be a higher bar pressure and has a longer pre-infusion, and that's where the complexities come from. Okay. So when we open the app, I'm actually running this off Mac. If any of you guys who haven't had the chance to check out the software, you can actually go onto the website and click on the infos page. And within the infos page, you will see the download section. If you click onto that, you will access all the available programs we can run upon. But the only platform that can operate the DE1 itself is Android-based only. So if you download the Mac version, which I have done, what will happen is you can view all the parameters, all the recipes and whatnot inside the program. But if you try to connect this to the DE1 itself, it won't actually function. So it's merely pure for a representation and expectation of what the app does and what to expect. But I've merely used this just for representative purposes here. But you can feel free to download this, even on the Android version, or let's say you have a DE1 already and you have a separate app. You can also download the program onto that different Android tablet and use that Android tablet as a backup or as a complete replacement itself. And this is also very good for any if anything goes wrong with your tablet. It's good to know that if you can't run the app or you can't connect, you can actually use the GHC to operate the machine, but it will be very basic functions. So the functions will merely be the flush button, the hot water, the steam, and also the extraction button. But the only thing is that the DE1 will only execute the last profile that you had programmed in. So for example, if I had a problem and this was the default program was the last one I used on these settings, and I only used the GHC, then this would be the program that would be executed when just using the GHC and not the tablet. A little bit of a compromise, but is quite life-saving when you do have a problem, but you can still make coffee. So let's say it's happened to me before where I've had a little bit of connection issues. I think that I believe though at the time I was updating, and I was actually on my way to work, and it didn't finish updating, so I basically went straight to the GHC and pulled my shot from there. Albeit I didn't have any data in front of me as well, but luckily I already had it tuned in, and it was all ready to execute from there. Okay, so I'm just seeing Yannick has a bit of a question, so I'm just going to read it out and see if I can answer his questions. How to choose the temperature on the gentle and sweet profile. Some roasters recommend brewing temperatures for their coffee beans because they figured out the right temperature with the taste and the SCASE device. Let's assume the recommended temperature would be 93 degrees. How would you choose the temperature on the DE1? Also 93 degrees or lower or higher. Does the Decent measure the slurry temperature or the water which comes out of the brew head? Okay, Yannick, this is some great questions, and let's see if we can go in and answer them. So I will go in and answer as they've come in. So how do I change the temperature on the gentle and sweet profile? So if we go into the presets list, which is here. Now, if I go from the start, just so everyone knows, so you come from here, and you will go into the cog setting, which goes into the settings and also changes the tabs at the top. And you will find the furthest one on the left becomes presets. If we can click on presets, we can have the short list of the recipes here. But let's say we don't see gentle and sweet here, but we know it should be on here. We can actually look in the secondary list here, okay? But we'll go into that in a moment. So let's go into gentle and sweet. And we can see there's a temperature list here, and we see a graph here. If we just click on the graph, what we will find is we will go into the settings of this profile. So specifically gentle and sweet, and you can see that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stages which we can control. Okay. Now, Yannick was just talking about the temperature, and it's very simple. It's just, you can see here, we can go down or up. Okay. And what I would like to let you guys take note of is there's an asterisk here immediately after I've changed the settings here. Now, when you see an asterisk here, it essentially means you've made an adjustment. And if you click on this tab again, it will save the settings that you have changed back into gentle and sweet. Okay. Now, it's important to realize that it will change and save gentle and sweet. Okay, but what happens if you wanted to save as? You would have to do something else. You would have to go, okay. Oh, hang on. You would have to go into presets and then change the name here and then press the piggyback. Okay, so so if you do change anything, i.e. the temperature that Yannick wanted to find out, you can see that the asterisk is here. And if we clicked here now, it will change this gentle and sweet profile to always have 85. So if I press it now, the asterisk will disappear. Okay, and it says saved. And so we note 85. So if we say we change profiles, so let's just say default and okay, it will go back to default, which we can identify here under the pressure profile name. But let's say we want to go back to gentle and sweet, or we click the wrong profile. Okay, we click OK. We go back into here. Oh, I know why. Sorry. If I was using the app, it would have saved it into, but because I'm using the Mac version, it hasn't saved it to. Okay, so You'll have to take my word for it, but I can actually show you if I put up my second camera. I do have a tablet here, but it's kind of better if I view it on here for you. So the temperature change here, and you can see it here. But if I did do that operation, it said saved, you would find if you click back, it would have gone back to 85, which we set before. Okay. Now, if you wanted to go to save as, let's say like on Windows, you're saving a Word document, for example, you have to go back into presets and change the name here to change it out. Okay. All right. So you're talking about the roasters, Yannick. Now, this is a very, very, very good question. Now, because one of the strong points of the DE1 platform is the stability of the temperature. Okay. Now, why is the DE1 platform so stable? It is mainly due to the 3 sensors it has continually giving data back to the DE1 app. Okay. Now, the DE1 app uses these data points at certain points, one being at the top of the coffee puck, right above the coffee puck, okay? And essentially is a sensor that is going from right into the middle, there's a hole, and the probe goes into it. And it is, I would say, maybe a few millimeters away from the puck. And this, it really gives us the true puck temperature that is occurring during extractions, okay? And how does this compare to, let's say, a traditional machine? Now, traditional machines, they do set the temperature of the boiler. But from my experience in the coffee industry, we would set the temperature of the boiler, but we would also use a SCACE device or just a regular temperature probe to test the brew water coming out of the group head. But with the DE1, because it also has a sensor within the group head that detects the temperature, the app is able to give more accurate temperatures when at the points that you want them, okay? So rather than on traditional machines where we would set the boiler temperature and then test the water at the group head and then make the adjustments depending on what the temperature loss was through the pipes and through the group head, I believe from my experience, I was seeing 5 to 7, maybe 8 degrees difference from the boiler, depending on the age of the machine. So you would actually set your brew temperature higher at that point to make sure that your water was coming out at the right temperature. But what we're finding with the DE1 is because it is so accurate, the temperatures that we're used to brewing at are actually a little bit lower. Whether it being because of the immediately accuracy of the temperature going into the group head, or whether the accuracy is maintained via the DE1 platform throughout the extraction. Whichever it may be, it is quite a consensus that the temperatures on the DE1 are a little bit lower. Now, to give you a benchmark, darker roast, we can expect to brew 80, I've tried 84 with good results, all the way up to 86, 88, depending on it. And for lighter roast, we're going from 88 all the way up to 92. So your ranges will be from 92 all the way to, let's just say 85, just to call it that. But that in itself gives you a bit of an idea on the nuances of the DE1, purely because of the technology inside. I personally use a lot of medium to medium light roast, and I rarely go over 90 degrees. But I would say the cleaner your coffee and the lighter it is, the more higher the temperatures you can go. What else could I say? It would also depend on your grinder too. If you have a conical burr, you can actually get away with higher temperatures because of the grind size distribution is a lot larger. But with the, yes, so for the Ni60, for example, you can actually expect to go a little bit higher. And this was something I've only recently found out because we've been very lucky in the factory. We've got a large flat burr from Option O P100. And I found that the recipes I've tuned to a certain bean are slightly off. and I've ended up reducing my temperatures a little bit. But I think recommendations from roasters is great, and I think it's a fantastic way to go. But what we DE1 users have to realize is that most people are probably not using a machine that is as accurate as us, and the higher temperatures usually are to compensate for a loss of temperature throughout the extraction. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. In general, it is a little bit lower and more so for darker roasts. Okay, so let's get back to the looking into the app. Okay, so so while we were going on to gentle and sweet, okay, I was very lucky to do a Zoom with Shin last week, and we managed to discuss the limit flow features, okay? And the reason I'm mentioning this is one of the things about the niche is, the DE1, sorry, is that you will have to learn how to interpretate what the recipe is trying to do, and is the graph data that you're getting from your extraction representing what is programmed. And this kind of dives into how a lot of people, because they don't understand how the program is essentially functioning. And I think it's, so for the guys that have had experience with coffee, it's because they've not had this data before. But for the guys that have not made coffee before, it's a little bit harder because they have to understand the different stages of extractions. But to put it simply, most extractions, you can break it down into three, okay? So one is pre-infusion, which is here. And pre-infusion is just ensuring that the grounds are all wet evenly so they're ready for extraction, okay? Rise and hold phase, which is the buildup of pressure, okay? So in this case, it is building up to 6 bar, okay? And then there is the extraction phase, or some, like in this example, is the decline phase. But if I took it off, it would just be a normal extraction phase, okay? But because this has it on, we can count the decline as the extraction phase. Okay, so most extractions will come into 3 sections: the pre-infusion, the rise in pressure, and the actual extraction phase. But I want to pay attention to this part here. Okay, this is the I wouldn't say red herring, but is the factor that a lot of people will not know about. Okay, and the easiest way to explain this feature here is it's like a overpressure valve or a sound compressor, okay? If, let's say, the flow rate, which is the amount, how fast the coffee is coming out of the group head, or how fast the water is going into the group head, okay, depending on which flow rate we're talking about. So this one is talking about the flow rate going into the group head, okay? So if the flow rate was higher, then this would actually kick in to try and lower the flow rate for you automatically, okay? So the DE1 will try and help you with this. And how that will be represented on the graph, if it did kick in, we would actually have an extra line of a blue line, and you would see this blue line sort of go a bit wild and go very high up, almost beyond 8 milliliters a second, and then try to go down and then back up. Okay, and you will hear the motors sort of go as a second clue. Now, I get a lot of people coming in and asking about why is the machine doing this and what is happening. And a lot of them, and it's actually a mix of people. So it's a mix of people with experience and a mix of people without. So what I generally ask them to do after that is I get them to use the blind portafilter basket, and I get them to check to see if the machine can build up pressure without the variable of coffee inside. Okay. Now, once we do this test, they will find that, you know, all they have to do is replace the regular basket with the blind basket and then engage that instead of coffee. Okay. And then they run the program, and all we want to see is if the pressure rises up to 6 bar, and that's it. Okay. Now that confirms two things. One, that there's nothing wrong with the machine, and two, that the profile that is running is actually working. Okay. But why do we want to confirm that? Is one, we want to make sure that obviously nothing is wrong with the machine, and two, we haven't changed anything in the recipe that is causing those wild flows in flow rate. Okay. And once we can confirm that, essentially it is all about the preparation, and usually it is a case of grinding finer. Okay. Now, why is it why am I suggesting a lot of the time for people to grind finer? They may have had previous experience with an older machine, or have had experience with someone else who has gifted them the grinder, and they said the grinder works, it should be fine. So in their minds, it's there's nothing wrong with my hardware, that the grinder should work. But what people do not realize is that the pre-infusion times for the DE1 are a lot longer, and even for gentle and sweet. So this is a 20-second pre-infusion time. Most machines don't go beyond 3, okay? And the longer your pre-infusion times, the finer you have to grind in order to build up pressure. Okay, as soon as the water wets the grounds, the resistance will go up, but only to a certain extent for a certain amount of time. Okay, so this is why you generally have to grind a lot finer on the DE1 platform as compared to other machines. But let's say if your grinder is not being able to grind fine enough, there are other profiles in here that you can use. For example, you could try out an E61, okay? And why am I picking this one? Oh, okay. So I'm finding that because I've only used this the first time on here, there are certain things that I cannot do. So I cannot actually click certain profiles to show you. But hopefully, yes, so the Classic Italian Espresso profile is here, which is actually very similar to the E61, okay, in that it is a 3-bar and a 9-bar extraction, okay. But why I wanted to show the E61, because it's even more basic than this, but you can essentially turn off your pre-infusions, okay, and try a shot that way, all right. Okay, so if you have a grinder that is, like, so for example, not grinding fine enough, you can play around with pre-infusions to make them a bit shorter. I would say try 3 seconds and see how you go. You might be able to build pressure from there, or you can just try without pre-infusion and see where you go. I've tried shots without pre-infusion on the DE1, and they are actually very, very good. And the reason they're very good is what's inside the DE1 group head. I did a Zoom with this previously, and it's called 9-bar extraction without pre-infusion. And I go deep into what is inside the group head and how it distributes water. But I'll give you the summary version in that it has a labyrinth of holes created via some brass plates before the dispersion screen. So what this does is it channels the water through different paths before it touches the puck and before it touches the dispersion screen, so that it's not essentially just spraying in one point on the dispersion screen. It's actually touching many points on the dispersion screen before it reaches your coffee. So the actual dispersion of the water on the puck is, I would say, it's phenomenal. Simply, to really do shots without pre-infusion is quite risky, because you're not using pre-infusion to reduce channeling, but is a way for you to use a grinder, let's say, for example, that can't grind fine enough, or your beans are very, very dark that don't really warrant a pre-infusion. Or maybe on the little bit on the stale end that you want to cut out those bad flavors. So that's a little trick I could give you. But yeah, so we go into settings and then app and then miscellaneous. We will find a whole load of sections here. And what we are talking about is the app version. So the app version is something that you will need to know about if you like to have your app updated automatically. And so nightly is the latest version with all the latest features that we've released. And it is called nightly because it has an opportunity to be a little bit unstable. But nightly, after a moment of testing, will become beta, and then beta will become stable. So even if you don't want to take the risk of it being a little bit unstable, which in all fairness is very rare, I pretty much run off nightly altogether, and it's very rare for me to come up problems, but they do happen. But if they do happen, or you see something that is a bit weird, you can just go back to stable and see if it happens there. And you can let us know on Diaspora, or just give us a ping and we'll see and investigate about it. But more often than not, we've kind of had a post on Diaspora and people have already given us feedback. But it's essentially why we do it. So if you wanted to run something that is really stable, you can, or something in between. Okay. But if you select the beta here or nightly here and press done, what will happen is that the app will actually update itself automatically for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay. How will you know? When you wake up your app, if it's done a update, a pop-up screen will come up saying you have updated to such and such version. If you click here, it will direct you to a web page and it will tell you what all the new features are. If not, you can just press OK and go about your day making coffee. Okay. And so Yannick's got another comment. So to add an article basically about temperature stuff you mentioned, this is not really covered in the manual. You could also reference the barista hustle about temperature equivalent espresso and make clear where the temperature of the DE1 stands. That's a great idea. And this is kind of what I was finding out about in terms of documentation, in that it's essentially why I said, we all start up on this journey, and we're all so tied up in how to get the best shot out that we often forget how the journey we've made in getting ourselves familiar with the program. And I believe you're completely correct, Yannick. We should document this, and I'll make sure I'll spend some time this week to document something on Basecamp to make sure we have where this is covered. I'm pretty sure it may be in there, but it may not. I think it may be in a video covered by John in, or maybe not. I think he just mentioned just to say it. I don't think he's actually said where to change it and whatnot. I think it's good to give a good refresh, because some of the software has been uplifted. Even some of the sliders that I was using at the start when I was first using the DE1 have now changed. So I think it's a really good idea, Yannick, and I'll make sure I'll spend some time to make sure that is done and included in the manual. But that's fantastic. Thanks for that, Yannick. So while we're in this malicious page, let's go in through the features. You can include a screensaver, and you can change the time it takes to however long it takes to cycle through each screensaver. I believe you can add some of the your own pictures to it. Some users have just essentially added their pictures to the screensaver folder within the app, and then the app just runs it as if it's an original file in there. Okay.